creating about as many jobs as those other metros combined.
So Bend hates to be compared to Boulder.
We could have a whole hour conversation about this, but I think it sets us up another kind of foundation for our region performing well.
You know, it's pretty forward-thinking, developments for an old busted-up sawmill town, right? I'm here with Dr. Koning. You and I had a chance to meet through a mutual client of mine recently, Mark Sternfeld. He introduced us and gave me a little background on what you were doing. I thought you'd be the perfect subject for this format. I think, your story and the story of what you're doing for that ReachAnother Foundation is incredible. And, I appreciate you coming in today to chat about it.
It's a pleasure to be here, Brian.
Oh, thanks. So, to get started, I think it would be it would be interesting to learn a little bit more about you, how you found Central Oregon. I know that you were a general surgeon here for many years, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then, you went into retirement to start what you were doing. But I'd love to hear kind of your origin story on Central Oregon and Bend and why it's home and when you found it.
Well, I'm a native of the Netherlands.
Okay.
And I went to medical school in Amsterdam.
Okay.
And then when I was talking towards the end of my training to a couple of American students who were in my class, they were talking about this exam. And I said, well, there's no exam coming up. What are you talking about? They said, well, no, this is the ECFMG exam. And they explained to me that that's the equivalent of an American medical degree.
Okay.
And then I thought, well, if they can do that, I can do that too. So 3 months later, I took the exam and I passed. And 3 months after that, I was doing an internship in the Bronx in New York.
Okay.
And the medical school taught me medicine, but the hospital made a doctor out of me in 3 months. I was part of the Knife and Gun Club in the South Bronx in New York.
Yeah.
It was very intense, and I spent 5 years there. And then I decided to continue on my original goal, which was to travel around the world and wind up in Africa.
Okay.
And I had taken flying lessons and had a flight certificate, and I signed up with the Flying Doctors Service of East Africa, which is now Tanzania.
Okay.
And they said, well, if you make it here, then we'll take you.
Yeah.
So anyway, I traveled around the world, and then in China, in the Republic of China, which is now Taiwan, I met my wife Patricia.
Okay.
And it was in a hot springs on New Year's Eve of 1976.
Okay.
So I have no trouble remembering that day. And then we decided to travel around the world together. So we traveled for 2 years almost. Through all of South Asia and India, Nepal, and Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey, back to the United States eventually. And when we came here, we thought, what are we going to do now? We decided to buy a Volkswagen bus, and we drove around the country looking for a place to live, because I had the privilege of just hanging out my shingle anywhere.
Yeah.
And to make a long story short, we ran out of money in Oregon.
Okay.
And the first night I spent in Bend was November 7, 1978, and it was minus 20 degrees. And we were in our Volkswagen bus.
And you still fell in love with it, or did it work?
It wound up at the top of the list, and so we're here 40 years ago, 43.
Okay, 2 years after I was born. So, I obviously discovered Bend much later. But what did Bend look like at that point? I mean, how's the landscape has changed?
Well, it's quite considerable, actually, the change. We started in Redmond, and Redmond at the time had 5,000 people.
Yeah. And
it was just a little agricultural and farm supply and logging town.
Yep.
And Bend, which was 15 miles down the road, had 10,000 people. And in fact, where Division splits off from 3rd Street, there is a hedge in the shape of the letters Bend.
Yeah.
That was the beginning of town.
Okay.
And there was essentially nothing on the on the west side, on the east side, I mean.
Yeah.
So it was very small, and it was very intimate, and it was very cool. But there were 3 surgeons in the Ben Memorial Clinic and 1 outside, and they all said that they didn't need any more surgeons in Central Oregon. But in Redmond, they were looking for a surgeon, and that's where I started.
Okay. And the rest is history. So, I thought it would be really important today to talk about, what you're doing. You retired in 2008.
Correct.
Yeah, and the path that you've taken since then. The format of this Bend Beat discussion is to talk about all the people that made Bend what it is today. Central Oregon, this amazing progressive place didn't happen by accident. There was a lot of people that worked hard to do that. And then part of that discussion is also that unique, outside of the unique entrepreneurial system that we have here, but this amazing collection of nonprofits and charities doing big things. And I thought it would be most appropriate to start with your foundation for a couple of reasons. One, I want to make a mention right away that you've got a gala coming up here in October. That's a fundraiser for it. It's October 19th.
Right.
Okay, and we'll put the information in the notes on that as well. I think it's going to be an amazing event, and I'm excited to be there. But I think this is a great time to kind of talk about, I think you've made a big difference, and it's interesting to see what you've been able to do from this home base of Central Oregon and how you're affecting change in Africa. But what was so impressive for me is when you sat down and told me about everything you were doing was the breadth and the scale of what you were doing. This wasn't, parachuting into a small town doing a few surgeries. You're up to having treated 5,000 people or the scale of that is so impressive to me. I want to unpack that and kind of hear the origin, how this originated and how you got so deeply embedded in Africa and what you're doing.
First of all, I want to say thank you, and I'm honored to be in this seat today. Boy, there are so many things, but like I said, I wanted to go to Africa from the time that I was 14 and decided to become a doctor. I didn't want to become a surgeon. That was just another one of those happenstance kind of things.
Okay.
And so obviously traveling around the world and winding up in Oregon was, let's say, a big diversion from that goal.
Sure.
And so when my wife had an opportunity to teach for a semester at sea, which is a college on a ship, we traveled around the world for a year. And one of the people there was an Ethiopian guy from Chicago. He's a professor of economics, and we talked a lot, and it made me realize that I really didn't know anything about Ethiopia. We know about the Roman Empire, and we know that Ethiopia is mentioned in the Bible 52 times, and then we knew about the famines in the 1980s,
Sure.
but I never really knew more about Ethiopia. And this man had a presentation about how beautiful and interesting Ethiopia was, and that piqued my interest. And of course, when we came home from that trip, Patricia went back to work at COCC in the UFO, and I was now retired. And so then I signed up with Medical Teams International, and they sent me to Ethiopia. So my goal was to do disaster care and to go here and there and help during disasters. And when I came to Ethiopia, I was just so struck by the enormous need there. Okay. And we were in a small hospital in Addis Ababa, and they had 2 surgeons, and what I had to give was exactly what they needed. So then I decided to keep coming back, and also because the people there are so genuine and they are so incredibly friendly and engaging, you just couldn't stay away. And so I called my twin brother, who was at the time a surgeon in Holland, and I said, "Come on, Jan, let's work together here. Let's just, instead of meeting in Holland, let's meet in Ethiopia for 2 weeks at a time and see what happens.
And what type of surgeries were you doing at that point?
We were doing general surgery.
Okay.
And we were operating really on, it was a general surgeon's dream. You know,
Okay.
the pathology that you see there is incredible, and it's very advanced disease. So there are difficult problems to deal with.
Yeah.
And also there was just bundles of everything.
Okay.
And so the fortunate sort of the coincidence that that occurred was that the Norwegians had just started a training program for neurosurgery in Addis.
Okay.
And our little hospital was the only hospital that had ventilators. And ventilators are breathing machines that you need after surgery, especially for people that have been operated on the brain. And nobody in Ethiopia for 90 million people had any of that stuff. And so when the Korean hospital received 3 ventilators, they, I should say at that same time, they expanded their neurosurgery training program to include our hospital.
Okay.
And so I got to know all the neurosurgeons, and there was only one neurosurgeon in all of Ethiopia at the time.
One neurosurgeon for
Right.
90 million people.
For 90 million people. And so we became friends with these guys who were residents, who were fellows in the neurosurgery program. And then I started seeing this parade of children with water on the brain.
And that's hydrocephalus?
That's hydrocephalus.
Yeah, okay.
And the hallmark of hydrocephalus is a very large head.
Yeah.
And then also the children get trouble with their vision, and their eyes are downturned. So you have a big head, and the eyes are looking down. So it's easy to diagnose, but that's also advanced disease. And I noticed that nobody paid attention to them. And so there were these, 17-year-old mothers with their third child who had hydrocephalus, and they were so forlorn and so at wit's end that I couldn't forget it. Especially since I knew that here, when you go for your well baby check, the doctor measures the head of the baby, and then it gets plotted on a chart.
Yep.
And that's your percentile line. And when you grow, you stay on that line. And the minute you veer off north, then they send you to the neurosurgeon, and you get an ultrasound now, and they know you have hydrocephalus. They put in a shunt and they fix it.
So it's a relatively easy fix if caught early enough with our treatment here, right?
It's like I like to think of it as the appendix of neurosurgery.
Okay. So really,
For neurosurgeons, this is a minor procedure, but like appendicitis, there are lots of complications that can happen with it, and of course it really, it's the most, even in the United States, the surgery for hydrocephalus is the most common surgery for neurosurgery on children.
Okay.
In Ethiopia, in the beginning, we calculated there would be 2,500 kids with hydrocephalus, which is a lot. In the United States, 3.5 times the population. There are about 1,000 children, so it was extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And they also, when I went to see the minister of health about this, he says, or they referred me to the Department of what do you call it, mental retardation. And I thought, And then I realized that the kids that survive are mentally retarded.
So they don't have treatment options, so they're immediately going to that point.
No, it didn't happen that way. They backed into that point.
Okay.
There was no treatment, and spina bifida is an open back, and that happens that's visible right when you're born.
Yeah.
So those kids never even made it on the scene. and the hydrocephalus kids get worse over time, and eventually the mother gets some help somewhere, but there was no help in Ethiopia, and so they either died or they became mentally retarded, and that's why they were categorized that way. Did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so then how did you go from that to the ReachAnother Foundation? You know, from recognizing the problem and starting with that to where you stand today, you know, how did that come about?
Well, this has always been something I wanted to do. That's number one. So
Okay.
I had the drive to work in the tropic and to help. The second thing is that I had a vision. I realized that for Ethiopia to grow and do better, a lot of outside help was necessary.
Yep.
And my brother and I felt that we were in a position to actually bring significant skills. We could train people and move the ball forward. And so in 2009, Patricia and I went back, my wife Patricia,
Yeah.
and I went back to Ethiopia for 3 months and then another time for 2 months. And then at the end of that year, we decided to form the ReachAnother Foundation.
Okay.
And so we set out to do more than just go there by ourselves. My goal was to recruit all my friends to come with me to Ethiopia. And in fact, if you think about impact, we have taken over 150 people from Central Oregon with us to Ethiopia,
Wow.
and all of those have had a life-changing experience, and all of those come back, and when their life is just different. They tell me that if you go to Africa and you see what we are doing, then you can never just keep on doing what you've been doing in Ethiopia. You know, people say things like, "Gosh, you know, I knew that Guatemala was poor,
Yep.
but Ethiopia is beyond description." And so one of them bought a little electric car and moved into a smaller house and just completely changed their lifestyle. But everybody, I think, that goes there has a new appreciation for what we have in Central Oregon, and also they feel a need to contribute and be world citizens.
Well, that's amazing how your vision here has had a multiplier effect even here locally. You know, well, it will all the way through to Ethiopia and affect change of that scale across the world. But I think what's interesting is also just kind of the multiplier effect here locally.
Yeah, people don't realize it. You know, when I go and ask people for help, then they're always very friendly and very helpful. But sort of the regular answer to requests from us is, well, you know, you work in Ethiopia, you're not local.
Sure.
And so what we just talked about, to me, is what makes an effort elsewhere a local thing.
Yep. Yeah. So you found a lot of support locally for this? I mean, are you working with any particular clubs, the Rotary or anything like that? Have they been of assistance on getting launched here with your organization, or?
Yeah, from the very beginning, I've been in the Rotary Club for 25 years. And
Okay.
I was the president of the Redmond Rotary Club. And then when I moved my practice to Bend, I gave up on Rotary because I had too many other things to do. But from the very beginning, I let's say courted Rotary
Okay.
to participate, because I know that Rotary International has all kinds of health programs all around the world. but you need the support from a local Rotary Club. And I found that in the Bend Rotary Club. Julie Miller was president of the Rotary Club at the time, and she asked me to apply again, and then one of the people on our board was Linda Johnson.
Okay.
And she was a hospital administrator here, and I knew her through that. And then she joined the Peace Corps, and even before, she came with us to Ethiopia, and she got involved, and that made the ideal situation for the Rotary Club to get engaged. And we had 2 Rotary glands that Linda essentially administered. And through the Rotary glands, we trained thousands of health extension workers and midwives and nurses. And we also had the first folic acid awareness campaign, which was the first effort in Ethiopia to broadcast any information on national radio and television about spina bifida.
And the cause and folic acid. And the role of folic acid in alleviating that, right?
Right.
And you had explained to me previously that folic acid as a food supplement is a relatively easy way to eliminate spina bifida and hydrocephalus from the beginning, but it's not part of the food source there, correct?
Right. The problem is twofold. You have to. It's a vitamin, so you have to eat it.
Okay.
And the problem in Ethiopia is that 50% of the population at some time during the year is food insecure, which means they're starving.
Sure.
And then, of course, you don't get enough vitamins either. And then the other thing is that the food choices and the available foods are limited. And so they don't, a lot of people don't get enough folic acid in their diet. And really, when you, it's an interesting problem from a public health point of view, because the first recommendation is eat your food, right? Eat anything green, and oranges and mangoes and chicken, and you don't get problems with this birth defect. And then the next thing would be, why don't we do food supplements? But food supplements are a medication in that sense. And we know from wide experience around the entire world that people after 2 years don't use their medication as prescribed. And so we know that as a curative effort, food supplementation with pills doesn't work. Food supplementation where people eat it passively does work. And so the thing that we have focused on for the last couple of years is to bring food fortification with folic acid by adding it to wheat like we do in the United States. And since 1998, spina bifida has become, let's say, 90% of the incidence has gone down. And now in the United States, we have only 1,000 babies a year that are born with spina bifida. And that's mostly because there are other genetic causes besides the food part.
Okay.
Yeah. So we know that if you do food fortification with a staple food, that you can essentially eliminate the disease.
Yeah.
In Ethiopia, the problem is that there's really only one food that everybody eats, because the farmers grow their own food, and that by itself makes food fortification impossible, right? Because you have to take the medicine to the farm and then you can give it to the patient. So that's not workable. No. But what they do eat is salt. And so now we're working on salt fortification, and I can tell you more about that later if you're interested.
So you've expanded this in so many ways. So you went originally doing general surgery, then you got involved with neurosurgery over there, and you ended up training neurosurgeons over there how to treat spina bifida. right? Or hydrocephalus, excuse me.
Yeah, both of them. Both of
Okay.
them.
And then you've also parlayed that into a nationwide food supplement program, trying to eliminate it from the start. And then I was also just reading here, you've also tried to address autism, and you opened a school over there that treats, or for children with autism as well.
Well, that's true. We have a daughter who's autistic,
Okay.
and we learned about this one school for autistic children in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And when our daughter was born in the 1980s, Central Oregon had one school for any kind of disabled child,
Okay.
the Ellis Hatch Center.
Okay.
And the people that we talked to here said, well, you're the only one in Redmond, so you can bring your child to Bend.
Oh, okay.
And we said, oh, wait a minute, I mean, there are thousands of people here, and how
Yeah.
come we are the only one? So actually the first 501c3 that we formed was for Rising Stars Preschool, which was a preschool for
In Redmond.
in Redmond and
Okay.
Bend, yeah. And that was
Okay.
the first, come to think of it. Anyway, we went to Ethiopia, saw the school, and then decided we wanted to help. And we had friends who, here's another one of those quirky things. So we had au pairs because Patricia was a professor and I was a surgeon, and
Yeah.
we needed help. And one of the people that came was Hetty Joustra, and she was 19 years old, and she stayed with us. And her main task was to take care of Katie, and that led her to become an autism specialist in Holland. And so when we went to Ethiopia, we called up Hetty and said, hey, do you want to help us start a school for autistic children? And she said yes.
Amazing.
And then we had a physical therapist from here, or speech therapist here, who came with us, and she said, can I bring my friend from London? She's also a speech therapist and also a physical therapist. And so we said, great. And she happened to be also a very competent autism teacher. And so all of a sudden we had a nucleus of people to start a school. And then the thing that I really should have had before, is that I had lots of ideas to make Ethiopia healthier and better. And all the ideas that I came up with went nowhere. And one example, you can cut this out if you want, but
Yeah.
one example is that I was operating with my friend Ferduak, and he's a general surgeon. And so we're butting heads in the operating room, and he asked me, do you know anything about autism? And I said, funny you ask, I have an autistic child. And so we finished the operation. And then we sat down, and I had never gone to a support group for autism or anything like that. And all of a sudden here I'm in the middle of nowhere. And I'm talking about autism. So then when I came back and he said to me, Bill, you helped me build a school. What are you going to say? And so we built, we helped build 3 schools. But then there were changes in, initially we wanted to have the same program that we had for neurosurgery, but for autism. And that takes a lot of logistics and know-how, and we couldn't do that. So also by then all of our time was eaten up by our neurosurgery project, and so the schools are, in fact, this is the last year that we're funding the schools, and 2 of the 3 are doing really well, and one still needs help. So, but we cannot be the primary supporters for those schools. So, yeah, and I feel badly about that, but you have to go where you can do the most good.
Well, I'm just absolutely impressed by, the vision you had and all the things you've been able to affect. I mean, and obviously it comes from a very personal place. And I'm just in awe of that. So, I've kind of been poking around at the edges. I mean, it's overwhelming the amount that you've been able to accomplish. But what does it look like today? How many doctors are now working over there because with the training that you provided, or working in hospitals that you help spur? What is the footprint of your foundation today, and how does it stand? How would you describe what ReachAnother is doing in Ethiopia today?
What makes ReachAnother unique is that we started working with the neurosurgeons, and they asked us to help them, and that was, the champion that I talked about earlier, and we formed this working relationship where I can honestly say that we know all the neurosurgeons in Ethiopia. We have grown up with them, and so when we started operating on kids with spina bifida, which is an open back, it's a sore on the back of the baby that is connected to the spine, to the spinal canal. And if they don't get operated on fairly quickly, they die from meningitis. And so when we started doing these operations in a structured fashion with the surgeons in Addis Ababa, they became known. And we started seeing those children with spina bifida. And there were hundreds of them. And the hundreds of them that were operated on, for everyone operated, there were 2 or 3 or 5 that could not have surgery. So we had these waiting lists. And everybody knows that if you have big enough waiting lists, 2 things happen. One is the patients die on the waiting list, waiting for surgery. And the other thing is that it creates a tremendous amount of friction in society. So the Ministry of Health became aware of these waiting lists and the trouble that caused for them. And so then they came to us and said, let's form a second program. And they said, we're going to build a center of excellence in pediatric neurosurgery at this other hospital. Will you help? So we helped them. And then they thought that the reason for doing this, from the minister's point of view, was to get rid of the waiting list, because then we'll be rid of the problem. Well, it just created more opportunity for these children to have care, but it didn't really address the waiting list. The waiting list went down from 800 to 300, which is still bad. And so then we had the Rotary grant, and we had the public relations effort about awareness of folic acid. And once that got on the radio, a week later, we were on the other side of the country, and people said, "Oh, we heard about you, with the Rotary." Yeah, we know about that. And then we also taught, with the grants, we taught several thousand health extension workers. And so all of a sudden, there is an awareness sort of in the community. Yeah. And now we're at a point where we have operated on over 5,000 children over the last 10 years, but now we're operating on 2,500 a year. And in another couple of years, we're planning on collectively operating on 5,000 babies a year. And at the same time, and the 5,000 babies are through 5 centers of excellence that are built around neurosurgeons that graduated and have gone to different universities in Ethiopia. So we picked 5 around the country so that there will be sort of a relatively short distance for them to travel to get care. And so there we are. And then we developed contacts with the health bureaus and the Ministry of Health. And last year, when one of the ministers of health came to our gala, we had a meeting the following day, and I asked them, what can we do to help you? And Dr. Jakob didn't blink an eye, and he said, bring me a workable plan to do food fortification and bring folic acid to everybody in Ethiopia. And I swallowed a couple of times, and I said, okay, why not? And I'm not a public health person. And in fact, I know hardly anything about public health. But I started working our network, and our friends in Brussels from the International Federation for Spina Bifida and Hydrocephalus had invited us to come to a meeting about genetics of spina bifida. It was in Austin. This was 2 years ago now. And so we went there, and there's this guy there who they said to me is Mr. Folic Acid in the United States. He worked his career was with the CDC, and he worked on birth defects. And he was an important force in bringing wheat fortification to the United States in 1998, and also in China, and he worked all over the world.
Wow.
And he's now retired, and he's sort of just like me, he picked a topic what seems like a very long time ago and never let go of it. So I got to talking with him, and then he got on the phone, we got on the phone, and we called this guy and that guy and that guy. And we called Nutrition International, and we called this guy in Ottawa, Canada, who is a food scientist, and he was working with fortifying salt with folic acid. We talked to him, and then we talked to the next guy. And what we found out was that in Ethiopia, everybody grows their own food.
Yeah.
So when people say, why don't you just give everybody folic acid?
It's not industrialized agriculture. You can't do it.
You can't, right.
Yeah.
And so there are some people that eat wheat in Ethiopia. It's about 20% of the population. And bread and pizza and buns are all very expensive luxury foods. So only rich people can afford to eat bread. And so when the ministry looked at fortifying food, one of their problems was that only the 10% that are the richest, or 15% that are the richest, would get it if you fortify flour. So in their socialist society, you can't do that. So wheat was not a good enough source, but everybody eats salt.
Okay.
And salt is made in the northern part of Ethiopia, and there is a salt flats that has 180 years worth of salt for all of Ethiopia. And so when the neighboring war with Eritrea happened, the salt supply from the sea salt was cut off, and then there was a salt rush to this salt flats, and there were hundreds of people that started their own salt producing companies, and that was a free-for-all. That was traumatic. But it worked, and there was a new salt supply. And then 10 years ago, the Ethiopian government started fortifying the salt with iodine. And after a lot of trouble, that is now working perfectly.
Okay.
Which is perfect for us, because now we have salt that is already being fortified, and we just want to add folic acid to it.
Is it involved in the same process? Can you piggyback what they're already doing?
You'll see at our gala, I have a little spray backpack that I got from my friend, the exterminator, who takes care of our house.
Okay.
And it's a backpack that you put on. And in Ethiopia, with that wand sprayer that everybody walks around your house with.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
That kind of high-tech mechanism they use for spraying iodine on salt. So they have an iodine solution in the backpack, and they spray it over the salt pile. These guys walk barefoot over all these salt piles, and they spray iodine on it. And then somehow that works well enough so that 90% of the population, 95% of the population now has iodized salt. And so our working group with Mr. Folic Acid came up with a proposal for the Ethiopian government that we presented this April. And it was a roadmap for folic acid food fortification for all of Ethiopia. And after we made our presentation, there was incredible enthusiasm in the room. And then the ministry said, okay, now we're going to take it home and we're going to consider it. And then a month later, they produced a policy brief. The Public Health Agency of Ethiopia made a policy brief, which is basically sort of the roadmap for implementation for making laws in Ethiopia. And then, so we went on to the next thing, and the next thing was the MacArthur grant that maybe I've told you about. And then we came back to what are we going to do in Ethiopia? And so there were, in the roadmap, there were 4 studies that need to be done before you can actually do the implementation. Like, one thing is you need to look at the salt supply and add the folic acid to the salt. And if that doesn't mix, then you have the wrong thing. And then you need to feed it to a number of people so that they will eat it. Because if you give people, just like in the United States, if it doesn't look good and it doesn't taste good, then I'm not eating it. And so that's important. And then the third thing is you need to look at how salt with iodine and folic acid survives in storage. And it takes about 6 months from manufacturing to being used.
Okay.
And you want to make sure that the end user has enough folic acid in the salt, right? And then also they want to look at how it survives cooking, but I don't have any problem with that. So these are the things that need to be done, and everybody is looking at the Gates Foundation and at the big guys for money to do those studies. And we are now at the end of the funding cycle for this year. So even if people apply for funding now, it won't happen until probably at the earliest late next year.
And how big a grant is that you're going
well,
for?
We're talking about our piece of that is $125,000.
Okay.
And so it's not that much money, but it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so we went, just like with the autism school and with the surgery program, we went out on a limb and we said, okay, we'll raise the money, but let's start implementing this thing.
Yes.
So our working group got together and we had our last meeting just the day before yesterday, and we've made an implementation plan that we're going to present in November to our friends in Ethiopia, and be working with the Public Health Institute, and so this is a sort of a preparation for implementation of these studies.
Wow! So it's coming just around the corner.
Yeah. It's happening right now. And so I'm scratching my head, I have to find $120,000.
So let's talk funding. So, this is a conversation both in subject and scope that I didn't think we'd be having here in Central Oregon and Bend. And I think that, what you're able to affect is amazing. And, the supporters, how do people who want to support you give back, help you achieve these goals to affect that change? What's the best way for them to do? Is it going to the gala that you have in a couple of weeks, or is it, a simple donation? Is it attending, one of your trips over to Ethiopia? How can people get involved?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
No,
Yes,
obviously our main fundraising source has been our gala here.
Okay.
And it's in November, and it will be on the 19th in October.
Oh, October, yeah.
It will be the 19th of October. And we still have tickets for that. I don't know. They're going pretty fast, but we'd love for people to call up and join that. We also have a lot of people who give small donations. And if you think about the impact of a small donation, if people gives you $5 a month, then you have $60 a year. But when they give you the permission to take that out of the bank account, you don't have to go back and ask them. And so that $60 is worth a lot more, because they maybe it goes on for 5 years or 10 years, so that's a big deal. And then, of course, there are people who periodically send us a check, and that's wonderful too. So the beauty of having small donations, just like in the political campaigns, is that indicates community support.
Yeah.
And we've had tremendous community support. At the same time, we need, especially right now, we need a bigger chunk of money, and so I'm hoping that I can find a group of benefactors who will give me $5,000 a year for 3 years, or $10,000 per year for 3 years, because that can really bring this food fortification program home.
Yeah.
And the promise really is that once that start, spina bifida will be an also-ran disease in Ethiopia within 5 years. So we can, right now there are, because of the things that we talked about before, there are 40,000 pregnancies that are affected by spina bifida. And half of those babies are miscarried or stillborn.
40,000 a year?
40,000 a year. And so there are 20,000 live-born babies. And we can only take care of 2,500 so far. And so the real answer is in bringing the epidemic down. But I'm convinced that within 10 years, this thing will be history. They'll talk about us the way we talk about spina bifida in the United States. Oh, yeah, spina bifida. Go to that clinic. The experts are all there. Everything is organized for you.
That's amazing. I mean, if you're talking 40,000 pregnancies a year that are affected by this, a 10-year run on that is 400,000 people.
Yeah.
400,000 lives that are affected. Well, and the multiplier and all the families and members of that, are even bigger. But, the numbers that you're talking about are high. You're trying to raise 125,000 or whatever. But when you're talking 400,000 lives that could be affected in the next decade, and then it stops it in perpetuity, the scale is immense.
And then here, talking about scale. So I'm just a country doctor in Oregon, right?
I beg to differ.
But so after we finished this grant or this conference in Ethiopia in April, and we presented our plans to the Ministry of Health, the same group was talking, and at one point we had 95 people on our conference calls, but there were a dozen or so on a conference call. And then Dr. Oakley says, "Koning, you're thinking too small." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, we should apply for the MacArthur 100 and change grant." And I said, "Well, what's that about?" And he says, "Well, it's a grant for a minimum of $100 million. And of course, it's competitive, but we have the recipe for success." And so then everybody said, "Okay." So we got busy, and especially the people from Nutrition International in Canada, Dr. Homero Martinez, he took this on with his team, and we worked like crazy. 4 or 5 conferences a week to put this program together for food fortification for basically the whole world. And what is marvelous about my colleagues is that they're the guys that know how many million tons of rice is bought in China, and how many thousand tons of wheat is smuggled into this country, and so that's real public health, in my opinion. And so we got together and we submitted our grant in August
Of this year.
of this year, and we just heard that we're in round 2.
Amazing.
So, but that means that we're going to bring wheat and rice food fortification to China and India and Nigeria and Ethiopia. That's sort of the and altogether there's I think 17 countries involved in the grant. We are looking at reducing spina bifida by 450,000 cases a year. And so, I mean, I was just on the panel, but the prospect is phenomenal.
Well, I think the trajectory of your path and what you've been able to accomplish, and even in just this discussion from, lowly old Bend, Oregon, here we are, to you're trying to affect the outcome of food fortification and health for the entire world, I think is incredible. And I think that, you may shirk it, but I think that, your importance is incredible. And, even just you carving out an hour to share your time with me has been awesome.
Yeah.
Very enlightening, and hopefully we can kind of redirect some of our audience and light to your cause in some small way.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you, Brian.
Okay, well, thank you for coming. Is there anything else you want to share before we go here?
Just one thing, and that is that we started talking about about what model we use in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And really the thing that makes us attractive for the big guys is that we deal with the families, and we have developed resources for the families and for the kids, and we train the doctors, and we know everybody in Ethiopia that's attached to this issue. And we also have taught the health extension workers who are the primary care doctors, like the nurse practitioners of Ethiopia. So we go from cradle to grave and up and down in Ethiopia. And this is a program that can be duplicated in other countries. And just yesterday, Homero Martinez said to me that, what you have in Ethiopia is a model for the entire world. If we can do this in Ethiopia, we can do it in any country.
Why not?
Sure.
I'm in awe. Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
It's great, it's just...
Thanks for joining us. This is the Ben Beat, and until next time.